We talked about lawfare, targeting individuals, taking them to court. Donald Trump, the best example of that, kind of like at the highest level. We've been fighting back against the weaponization of the legal system and the bureaucracy against Americans. Really, when I say we go back to the pro-life protesters, we go back that we've represented. I mean, they're talking about 80s and early 90s. When we go to the Tea Party groups that were, again, targeted by the IRS and the FBI and DOJ. But then, they learned from that is, hey, let's just go after the president and former president of the United States. That's who we've now weaponized to that level in our judicial process inside the United States. But there's a new move, too, which is don't just go after the president, just go after a judge. And you're going after the judge not because of anything they've said prejudicial or, again, because because of their political views, even though I think that's part of it here. But you're going to say, this judge, I disagree with their moves on this case, so we're going to have a coordinated effort, and that's what we saw here. And we'll go to Harry Hutchinson because, Harry, what we saw is that Glenn Kirshner put together through his podcast, it was through MSNBC, but it has a podcast, a way to file a complaint with the 11th Circuit. And those on the left, if you give them a way to protest, they will follow it. And so they sent so many in that were so similar. Judge Pryor now, the chief judge of the 11th Circuit, has said, we're not accepting any more of these if they're just copy and paste.
Absolutely. And I think the judge is precisely correct. So the judge is reacting to the weaponization of the courts. Keep in mind that Mr. Kirshner was a former federal prosecutor, and he put together a podcast, and then he linked the podcast to a YouTube video, which essentially was a how to do a complaint video. And it provided a step-by-step approach to filing these complaints. So it is all a made-up job that represents the full weaponization of the courts. It's important to keep in mind that if you go back to the Trump conviction last week, that the third highest DOJ official stepped down from the Biden Justice Department to work in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office on the so-called hush money trial. So what we have seen since 2020, in my view, is a coordinated campaign to prevent the democratic process from operating. And one of the ways in which this approach takes place is to try to prevent Donald Trump from campaigning. And I think Kirshner is part and parcel of this effort.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, Will, again, these kind of coordinated efforts to go after this judge, and this, I think, listen, we saw so many missteps by Jack Smith, and we saw the fact that they went in, guns a-blazing, or raiding Mar-a-Lago, and
intent. You could authorization of use of deadly force in that case as well,
right? I mean, remember this was the initial action that took Donald Trump from maybe I could go for that again to put him right back at the top of basically. I think that was the time when he secured the GOP nomination, is when Mar-a-Lago was raided, and then since then they've had to admit. Which, I mean, I have no idea how long this is ever going to take to be figured out. And hopefully he'll become president before they ever do, and they can move on with this. I think it's so absurd since classification is a power for the president. And I do believe in the power of the president to be able to declassify whatever they choose to do, so long as they are president of the United States at the time that they do it. But putting that aside, then they get all the records, and the records don't match the bookkeeping. So when they provide it to the defense, I mean, there's thousands of pages of documents. The defense has nowhere to go. It doesn't match up.
That's right. And I think this case is the prime example to show how many times the left holds a double standard when it's with their own or with a conservative, whether it be they're saying the president mishandled classified documents and they can't even handle classified documents appropriately, or even to this complaints against Judge Cannon that Glenn Kirshner put forward. The main complaints that they were sending to the appeals court was that she was delaying the case and had an improper motive. And Judge Pryor said, although many of the complaints allege an improper motive in delaying the case, the allegations are speculative and unsupported by any evidence. And it says the complaints also do not establish that Judge Cannon was required to recuse herself from the case because she was appointed by then President Trump. So they're complaining that she's delaying the case. However, they're saying send thousands of complaints to the appeals court so that they have to go through them all and maybe take her off the case. That's a delay tactic in and of itself. Yeah. Having a clerk and then all the lawyers and all the judges at the appeals court have to go through thousands of complaints that are sent in. We know that the wheels of justice turn slowly. The fact that they have to open these and go through them all, and that's why I think Judge Pryor did the right thing and said, listen, we're putting an end to this. We're not even going to read them if they appear to be similar in nature, because what Glenn Kirshner here has done is actually potentially delayed proceedings even further because of this coordinated effort. But when the left does it, totally fine. Totally fine.
Oh, of course. I mean, Harry, just to go back to this, it does seem like, I mean, you've got here, it's another way they can weaponize the legal system is to, we've seen the brutal attack pieces against Supreme Court justices, and now we see it against district court judges.
Absolutely. So if you look at Congressman Jamie Raskin, he essentially has told Chief Justice Roberts to force Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito to recuse themselves with respect to anything having to do with Donald Trump. He doesn't have that power. And in fact, Congressman Raskin is violating the separation of powers provided by the United States Constitution. And if you look at what's going on with respect to this particular case, the complaints, the orchestrated campaign against Judge Cannon, we have a similar activity. In fact, if we follow the approach, as Will rightly points out, this further delays the trial. And so if Jack Smith believes that Judge Cannon should be recused, the proper venue is to file a motion with the courts, not to orchestrate a letter-writing campaign based on a YouTube video.
You know, I want to play this sound from Jamie Raskin because, again, you brought him up, Will, and I just to kind of take into account how they have tried to demonize this judge and the multi-step process and the weaponization. I will say it over and over again. You call it lawfare, but lawfare is coming to the United States in a big way. It was here, but it's coming a big way now that it's being used against the president and federal court judges. Take a listen to Democrat Jamie Raskin.
This is like an Atlantic City mob understanding of people who go into federal or state courts as judges, that somebody owns them. And I think Trump's position is either he owns the judge, he controls the judge, he feels that way about Aileen Cannon, obviously, or they're someone who can't be trusted, they're a political enemy. The whole world is friend or foe, which of course is a fascist way of looking at things.
Of course, fascist way of looking at things, Will.
They love language on the left, and they love demonizing people. However, there's been nothing that I've seen that this judge has done other than be a judge. And Logan brings it up all the time, is that they love to label judges they don't like by who appointed them. And they say Trump appointed judge as if that isn't the natural process for becoming a federal court judge. You can go through every federal court judge and apply that label, whether it be Clinton appointed judge, Bush appointed judge, Obama appointed judge. I don't know. There may be even some Carter appointed judges still around. It's probably on the line. But you're looking at this and you're saying you can't just label someone and try to make that as a pejorative thing on them by they were appointed by the president of the United States.
Right. I mean, listen, the whole thing has gotten it is getting out of control. I think we see that with the Bragg case. You're seeing that with the fact that the Chief Judge of the 11th Circuit is having to come out and say, and by the way, has disagreed with Judge Cannon in some actions she's taken through the normal process you would go through if you felt like the judge had overstepped or not followed the right process. But so he's not trying to protect her because he agrees with every procedural decision she's taken. But the fact is that it's a clear, coordinated campaign with a bunch of people sitting in the exact same, copy and paste complaint in, telling the court to have her removed.